All right, welcome to another episode, a very special episode of Silver Lining for Learning. I'm so happy that we are still doing this. This is the 50th episode. And when I started this, I was not sure how far we would go, whether we would even start. So I sent an email to Chris Didi of Harvard, Kurt Bunk of Indiana University, Pune Mishra of Arizona University, and Shuang Ye from East China Normal University, and our Scott McLeod, from Colorado, University of Colorado. And we all had a chance to talk, and we decided to do a show, but we did not plan that we would go this far. But so we are so happy. It tells us that at least we are enjoying it as much as probably you are enjoying it. I hope you have enjoyed this as much as we have. So today we are doing some reflections, what we've learned from the past 49 episodes, and what each one of us will see might happen in 2 to 3 years of time in terms of education. We have vaccinations spreading across the country and in other places, and looks like schools might return. And what would that mean? What happens post-COVID as well? So let me start with Punya Mishra. Punya, what do you think you've learned, and where do you think what might happen in 2 to 3 years in education?
Thank you, Zhao. Yeah, I can't believe that it's 50 episodes. I remember when you had first sent that email, it was with this provocative sort of question: what if this thing goes on for a year? And I remember like scoffing at it. And I wish you had said 6 months, then we'd be out of it by now. So anyway, here we are. But I do think that there is sort of an overall change in the mood as far as sort of the vaccine, as the COVID crisis is concerned. I think that with the vaccinations and so on, there is a sort of a positive sort of a feeling to it. And I think that's reflected in the, those of you who have gone to the new design of the website or the videos, you'll see there is a certain change in that as well. So I think the tone of our program, if I have to speak to that, has sort of shifted somewhat. I think initially, if you look at a lot of our initial episodes focused on sort of even like, the first one, and then the next one with China, the episode number 3, really, and ones from Italy and all of those, the world was really focused on how educators are responding to this immediate crisis. There was a lot of that, right? But over time, I think even early on, we had some episodes like Paul Kim, for instance, was early on, which was looking at how some of these tools and technologies can be used in new ways, and that COVID could be possibly a sort of a turning point in terms of the incorporation of technology and its acceptance. And so we have had some fascinating episodes with some really interesting and wonderful people over these 49 episodes. So a couple of things that I think stand out for me, and I hope that as a field, we take these to heart. So one, and I've said this before, so I'm stuck record on this, but that, given it's the 50th episode, so forgive me for repeating myself, is that the fundamental inequalities in the world around us undermine a lot of what we as educators or educators in general want to do. And that's a problem that's bigger than can be solved necessarily by teachers or principals or superintendents or educational leaders. So I think the crisis has made that very clear, that the impact of this is felt much more on groups which are previously disadvantaged, and in some ways the people who were privileged, it hasn't made that much of a difference to them. I mean, you have your house, you could cut yourself off, you could create learning pods, you could make sure that all your kids have their own devices, you could do all kinds of things, right? So I think that's, again, we all knew this, but I think this has sort of made that a lot more obvious. I think the second thing is, like, early on, I wrote this blog post about the value of school. And basically in that, I made the argument that that yes, schools are places where we send children to learn and so on. But in some ways, the COVID crisis sort of made obvious that schools were also playing a very important role, that of babysitters, of which, an economic function which allowed people to do their work and the schools would take care of them, right? And that was sort of half tongue in cheek. But I think if you look at the whole sort of argument about kids should go back to school and no, it's not ready yet, and the union saying one thing and politicians saying another thing, I think it's also made that piece important, that, made it salient, that the value of school and how important a role this plays within the broader sort of socioeconomic structure of the world, right? One thing that was kind of interesting, and I usually don't talk about sort of the TPAC framework and so on, but people have asked me to come and give a couple of talks about that. I think one shift that I've seen that has happened is, if you look at the TPAC framework, one of the things is, Schulman talked about pedagogical content knowledge. And one other aspect is this technological pedagogical knowledge, which is using technology for pedagogical purposes. I think that what this has done, it has really jump-started the technological pedagogical knowledge of a lot of educators. There's been a lot of creativity that has come in. The instances where we had people particularly from the global South, speaking to using, we had the whole episode on mobile learning, thinking about, I still remember, Shwange, that photograph you had of the teacher who had strapped a phone to a chair. And that's just one instance of a creativity that people brought into the play, but more importantly, a comfort with these tools for pedagogical purposes. What is missing still, however, is a deeper conversation around content. So I don't see enough discussion or, discussion around, what does it mean to teach math, or what does it mean to teach science, that what kinds of tools are best adaptable for particular content areas and so on. So that's something I feel is I hope in the next few years we see a lot more of. And I can go, I won't go on for much longer, because I'd love to hear what other people have to say. The final one that I worry about, and this again comes back to something Shwange said in one of the episodes where we revisited China, that things have just gone back to normal. And I see a lot of the rhetoric around the rhetoric around learning loss, the rhetoric around that we need to have tests to know where people have fallen behind. That is sort of this deficit model of thinking, where I think a lot might have been learned around resilience. I remember forgetting the name of the guest from Britain who had talked about students during the Second World War who had been, shifted off to the villages, and that some of the most creative, that generation grew up to be some of the best authors, writers, playwrights, musicians, filmmakers coming out of England. And I think that by seeing learning in these very narrow instrumental terms, we might be doing injustice to learners, right? And what they might have achieved and gained in during this time. So I could go on, but I think I'll stop with that. And Zhao, let you pass the baton to the next person.
Thanks, Punya. By the way, you were talking about learning loss. I just wrote an article just published yesterday, the day before, the prospects. It's about learning loss. To say, I call it it's a trap. We should avoid the learning loss trap, because people are using numbers, statistics to make an argument for more testing, for teaching only math and reading and ignore something else. But thank you for that reflection. Kurt, can I come to you to ask you about your reflection, your thinking?
Well, 50 shows. And it was March of last year when I was visiting my son in Portland, and I got the email from you, and I would like to jump in and talk to us. Okay, sure thing. Little did I know that that week was the last time I would get a haircut for a year. And little did I know, when I was in Portland, I would start running just like Forrest Gump, and I haven't stopped 358 days in a row. It's been 1 year and 2 days with no haircut. So this show has been parallel to all of that. So as I think about things, there seems to be a tension. Smiles and frowns. My prediction is we all will be contacted by people we never would have thought we'd be contacted by, because our field, whatever we want to define it as, is now been made prominent in many ways all around the world. And so the contacts, the networks, the requests, I think are going to come in ways that we don't expect. That's been the case in the past too, but I think more so in the next 2-3 years, because people will be innovating in new ways, creating new high school, creating new 2-year college systems to get students ramped up and get college credit quickly. That's at low cost. But so we'll have this tension, what I see, between the folks, and I just got out of a session where we had Dr. Bob Cosma as a guest, and Dr. Tom Reeves from Georgia asked him a question. He said, there's so much in the news that's negative related to educational technology and what's happening with kids in schools or in higher ed settings. Given all that we know about online and distance learning after the past few decades or the past century, can't we do better than this? And will we do better than this? And so I think in part, there'll be commissions. Chris Deedy is one who served on many ed tech planning for the US and for local institutions. We'll be called on to come up with solutions, I think. We'll be part of that, I think more so. Our discipline will be, people in our discipline will be called on to seek out new paths, new programs, new tools and resources that could come into play. So there'll be a tension between us serving a role in terms of the problems that we all face right now, and in terms of the requests that we all get, and we're going to get more of. So, I just talked to a student this morning who was going to lose her job in a 4-year college in Pennsylvania, and she found out she's not. Why not? Because they're going to create a new program in educational technology and need faculty to teach it. They're disbanding many programs. They're University of Pennsylvania, California, or Pennsylvania at Indiana, I guess it is laying off 80 or 90 faculty. But now rethinking that and creating a new program in educational technology where demand exists. And I think we'll see more such demand and more such programs and experimentations and innovations within the higher ed space, within the K-12 space. I think in terms of research areas, given all that has transpired over the past year, I think engagement has to be an area that gets attention, to get some funding, and self-directed learning. And that's an area that I've been exploring. I think there'll be increased interest, need, opportunities in self-directed learning. Those are a couple of things I'm hearing over and over about AI and its impact and so forth, and that's a given. But I think engagement and SDL are the two areas that I'll be exploring a little bit. So there's tensions and there's opportunities. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kurt. I like the opportunities part. And, a lot of universities are facing the challenge of losing staff, all those things. But I'm glad to hear the story that this university is thinking in a different way. Now, Chris,
she had her notice in hand, said, you got 5 months and you're going to lose your job. And they said, we're going to take the letter back.
Okay.
And you're going to, say, so that's a positive story. That's a good story.
That may happen in Kansas, we don't know. So, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of creative faculty in higher education are pushing the limits of Zoom and similar systems to move it into active learning when it was never designed for active learning. I'm using all these workarounds so that in a class of 64, I can have students all playing a social game at the same time. And I'm using these ancillary tools like digital Post-it systems and spreadsheets that have a my group needs help button so that I can monitor all the groups at the same time. And there's faculty doing all sorts of things in all sorts of disciplines, pushing the envelope. The faculty that are creative, that see this as an opportunity rather than just as something that you live through till you can get back to the classroom. And what's going to happen, I think, is that the big vendors are going to realize that there's a big opportunity here to design a system bottom up for massive active learning, not MOOCs, not repurposed video conferencing systems, but design it bottom up for massive active learning and doing. Because if you look at the polls of how many people say, I don't want to stop working at home, I don't want to go back to headquarters. Well, I think that the center of gravity is going to shift from, the majority of workers interacting face to face and some people across distance to the other way around. And then they'll want a platform that really empowers that. So I think adult workforce capacity building will then, people, if they like that, then they'll use it for adult informal learning. And then if the adults are using it, then the graduate schools are going to be using it. Undergraduates, maybe not so much, because there are more drivers for face-to-face. K-12, maybe not so much, because it's different than adult capacity building. But I think we could see in 2 to 3 years, platforms that make it easy to do a lot of the things that we're highlighting in Silver Lining for Learning that people are doing with gum and shoestrings now. And then I think something else is going to happen 4 or 5 years down the road. Remember when people talked about Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, and there was this big furor about Web 2.0, that the web wasn't just a presentational medium dominated by a few information providers, but it was going to be taken over by everybody, and social media and so on, and make it, a communal thinking ground, which of course happened. I think the same thing will happen when we have a powerful online system for active learning. I think the people that think of themselves as providers are going to find that the students are actually going into, learning 2.0 and really assuming a lot of agency in that process, which I see as exciting, and which we've seen again in some of the Silver Lining for Learning episodes. So I think one of the values of the show is that our case studies are actually providing partial blueprints for how this future might develop if people are smart enough to mine them as opportunities. And I think that I used to think, gee, how are we going to have enough episodes for the next 2 months? I now think, parallel to what Kurt and Punya said, the train is moving, and there's going to be a steady stream of really interesting things that we can find and highlight that across the world are going to be effectively inexhaustible.
Thanks, Chris.
So, Zhao, can I just add one thing? Chris,
Sure.
thank you so much for
Absolutely.
mentioning
Sure.
this shift. There was this recent story, I think, NPR, about a significant percentage of children and parents who do not want to go back to the existing sort of the system that existed before. That for many, not many, not as like a majority, but for a significant group of people, this remote learning has worked. And I think that's going to be a pressure to not go back to the existing classroom, because, and we've had some amazing student examples in our show as well, of who have sort of taken this bull by the horn, so to speak, and have gone ahead and utilize this for their own learning. And so coming back to Kurt's point of self-directed or learner-driven learning. So I think that is also going to be a significant, it's not just going to be the workforce where people will say, oh, I can work remote. It's also going to be a certain group of learners and parents who are going to say, this actually is working for my child. because they can do their work, and after that they actually go and do their own thing, they learn, or they are not getting bullied because they don't have to, whatever the reasons may be. So I think that's going to be an interesting pressure on school systems as well.
Well,
At least
just
those who can.
Let me add one thing then to that. So Puni, before you mentioned someone from the UK, and that was Stephen Hipple. And Stephen created Not School. And what we're seeing with this COVID crisis are a lot of not schools. And some are successful and some might not be so successful, but there'll be no turning back in terms of people are exposed to things that Hipple was doing 15 to 20 years ago that not too many people found out about. This crisis, this pandemic, has opened people's eyes up to all sorts of innovations that had been going on for a couple of decades, now are being highlighted. And we're highlighting many of them. We've bringing people in, even Brian Beatty's HyFlex last week. Many people had not heard of that. A lot of people have. So this is gonna snowball, as Chris and Punya say. And I think the opportunities exist, but teacher training is a key component. I just talked about Bruner today and his discovery model. We had Robert Cosma in my class talking about being a teacher in the 1970s, creating a model of instruction, getting kids out of learned helplessness in the inner city of Detroit, and how success breeds success in the approaches that he was taking. It was very complex, yet very simple in terms of the moderator or instructor role changing or shifting in some ways, which got the students to be engaged in new ways with the content that they had never been before, and got them to be successful in ways they had never been before in inner city Chicago. Highly diverse classrooms. That's the goal today too. And I think that we need to, all these people indirectly, and every week I've been asking, what are the principles that underlie your model, your framework, your initiative, your project? There are some commonalities in terms of the principles that they're utilizing. And I think these ideas have to be embedded in teacher training programs. And that's going to start happening as well. And you'll be writing the books about that, Young. I'm sure you will be. I think sure you already have started doing that. You're starting to think about the next 2 or 3 books you're going to be writing for, and Corwin's probably signing you to a number of contracts. But anyways, I think
not really. But Kurt, I just want to add really kind of 2 things before I bring out Shuangye. I think where Punya was going was kind of interesting about parents and teachers and students have different experiences. And Kurt's point about teacher training, this is not an advertisement, but I was just trying to say this, yes, people have been talking about, de-schooling, unschooling, no schooling, homeschooling for a long time. How fast and how far can we go that direction? It might be, we don't know, but it's possible, and it's more possible than ever before. Before people were running, we'd run correspondence schools, we run radio schools, we run TV schools, we run all of those. So maybe education can be and should be reorganized. Second point is about teacher education. Again, that's not an advertisement. I'm on the advisory board for a university called Moreland University, which just was made. It used to be basically teacher training certification online. They're doing a lot of global training. So that's already been spread and across in different places. But before I get to talk about this, I want to bring Shuangye. What do you see? Where are we going to be in 2 to 3 years? You've been with the shows for a long time. You are not an educational technology person necessarily. You're from a broad educational policy person. You're managing, you're editing a journal. What do you see from, also you're in Shanghai, you're in China. So we the rest of us are in the US.
Yeah, I think that different from other hosts, my experience and also my personal, as well as my witnessing China's change in the whole pandemic, because China is almost the first country to have this kind of response, a whole nation, and also emergent educational responses to the pandemic announced that this whole nation home online learning. Yeah, and now we are back to normal. I think we are kind of a case to exam as kind of not as kind of example, but at least we are showing kind of a path from pandemic, from in the pandemic and a post-pandemic schooling in reality. So first of all, I would say I think it's kind of mixed what will happen in 2 or 3 years. First, as far as I know, the vaccine could only be effective for 6 months. Yeah, so maybe we cannot be so optimistic if this could not be this COVID-19 will not transform or change into kind of flu-like virus. So that is still kind of uncertainty ahead of us. And the second is about the this is schooling would happen in 2 or 3 years. As far as I could see from Shanghai case, that is, we are all back to the normal, all back to the normal. That is even that is some kind of a new policy that we couldn't understand even from the Ministry of Education, that all the handphone, mobile phone are not allowed. Students' handphone not allowed to get into the campus. So you can see we are back to the normal, but in some case I could understand this kind of mentality. For like in this term teaching, I switched it to a kind of a low technology mode. That is, use fewer PowerPoint. I would like to have a more face-to-face interaction with my students in the class. So I don't know whether this is kind of revenge or for the too many Zoom teaching. Yeah, so I think maybe this could be a kind of mentality for us if we're back to the normal of schooling or campus. That is, we would prefer low technology and more human touch in the new classes. At least that is what I can see, at least from myself. And then I can see and also inspired by our speaker, like Royal from the University of Washington. We have a kind of episode to tap at the brain of a Royal, that he brought a message that is a kind of a popular class during the pandemic. It's a writing class of autobiography. I think that would make people to focus more on those side of education or aspect of education, that we should not compete with technology, or we should not do what the robots could do. That is, I think this is a Young's book. So that is, we maybe would tap more from what we cannot be taught online. I think this is one human consequences from this online learning online during the pandemic. And the second, this is what I can see is this the world, even for the countries and also for our students, that every family, the school be divided in space and schooling in time. That is kind of a two worlds. This also inspired. This was inspired by this book, Globalization as Human Consequences, by Zygmunt Bauman. He proposed that this is a two worlds division as kind of a human consequence of a globalization. So I would like to make it as kind of a schooling in space and schooling in time. That is, maybe some countries and some families, or part of this, some of the schools, they would be only constrained by space. That is, they could learn, have this kind of rich resources, tap the rich resources from the online, and then they can learn from the different parts of the world, just like they can learn Penguin. Yeah, from the online, we have an episode on that. But they will still have quite a lot of schooling, mostly serving this for the lower class, for the poor, or they have to rely on the public schooling. That is, they will still be constrained in space. Maybe they were back to this kind of class size, class and blackboard or whiteboard, and then with more than 20 or 30 or even 50 students with one teacher, they will still keep their traditional mode of teaching. So this is my estimation. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shuangyi. That's very insightful about the various things, especially China is an interesting country. Remember, China and India, they probably have, about half of the world's population of students, right? If you just put those two countries together, that's very big. That's going to affect a lot. So my own reflection, first of all, I'm always thinking about the individual student. So from what we have seen, all the 49 or actually 40, perhaps 40 episodes with the guests, I feel like, no matter where I am, I can learn by myself. So, Punya and I were trying to write a book together, talk about design. Punya said about the design of school for one. So if I can learn from anywhere, the second question is, do I want to learn? I think that's the question we did not talk enough about, is the want, it's the non-cognitive, the motivational fact, do I want to? There's so many resources. I feel like, even if I were born, I was born in a little tiny village in China, in my own tiny village, I could go back and really learn. So just, I can make friends with people from other places. I can organize myself. So how do you help individual students to organize their own learning environments? That's a thing. I'm really worried about that. We are limiting our students' learning opportunities by placing them in schools or in classrooms. And I think that goes back again, Punya, a lot of parents have experienced learning differently now. A lot of students have experienced. Maybe we can design a different kind of learning. The second question I have is, especially reflecting to Shuangyi's conversation, we know the world is changing. Post-COVID is going to have a lot of remote learning, a lot of different things, especially in the Western world. May not necessarily happen in China that fast. I worry about students who enter school today. In 12 years, they are going to graduate to a very different environment. But if they are only stuck in the classroom, looks like, China and many countries are still believing we put the students in the classroom without exposure, without living experiences outside the world. What can they do? What can they do? I'm very worried about students who have no experience with society, who does not understand what's happening, who's just been learning the same things, for 12 years. What are they going to do? Then where is that going to go? So that's why I've been arguing for globally connected learning environments a lot. If you're designing, Punya, like a school for one, but that one is probably enrolled in a large ecosystem that involves students from other places. A third point I think I want to make is that from all this we've learned is the amazing creativity and curiosity and innovations that all people are doing. We found so many people doing very interesting things. But although all the interesting things has a lot to do with how do you enable individual students for self-determined learning, how do you use technology to bring and spread resources, and how do you engage in collaboration, all those kind of things. But then a big question. I was going back to Chris talking about a new learning system. What would a new learning system be? I have been recently been asked to review many different systems. And since we're on the show, I'm not going to do any commercial on any products. There are very interesting systems popping up. Chris, you're absolutely right. But then I'm thinking about, could we build one global learning place where all the individual creative people can work together? You know, can we have something like that? I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. I'm always dreaming about that. So that's really some of the reflections I've had. But my biggest concern is we keep schools the same way as they were and deprive students of their opportunity to access things that's actually readily available. I was wondering, anyone wants to react to that?
I've been thinking about something similar, but not exactly to answer that question. When I wrote my World is Open book, I had 12 predictions of the future and where we're going. And one of them was the rise of the Super E mentor or Super E coach. I think that right now, if you look at the emphasis in these nano degrees or micro credentials or whatever you want to call them, certificates or badges, whatever, you see an overemphasis on the business world in the computer science world. You know, we see a lot of learning analytics, got to have learning analytics, got to have machine learning, got to have Python programming. But what's missing from the equation is human development and counseling. I think that someone who gets some training, modest training in counseling and human development that combines with their domain expertise, whether it's occupational therapy, physical therapy, accounting, whatever, instructional design, and a second certificate or an understanding of how to use the web or how to use technology for learning, you'll be golden. That understanding the tools out there for learning and helping guide people in your discipline to find, filter, utilize, evaluate the learning resources in front of them. It's just a lot of learners aren't aware of what's possible. So I think a guide, more of a nudge. It goes back to my notion about training future teachers in this new world in front of us.
So Kurt, I'm
really think.
Kurt, I'm going to ask. I'm going to challenge you on that. Why do we train teachers? Why don't we train students to become their own teachers?
Well, sure. That should be part of the equation as well. But they're still going to need people that nudge them along, that motivate them, that they can come to discuss what they've learned. You know, to give them some additional structure or guidance, that gentle nudge along the way. But yeah, the primary, I think if we want a primary, is to a society that's more equipped to be self-directed would be fabulous. And that some place will focus on that undoubtedly in the next decade or so. We'll see an emergence of programs that foster, and we're seeing some of these programs emerge. I'm blanking on the name of the new college where the students just rotate around. What's the name of that?
Minerva.
It's a case in point, but there'll be more such Minervas out there. And
so
I don't know. Someone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah. If I can jump in on this, I mean, this is this whole idea of the school of one. And the idea is that not that there is only one student there, but that one could be anybody. And the question is, can we create systems which are flexible to meet the sort of the very diverse needs that individuals have? And when you think about at the heart of all of this are these learners, these kids, right? And I was sort of reminded of something that Kiran Birseth said when she talked about the Riverside School and why she started the schools. He said, that when she saw her child, and we see that in all of our children, you see that boundless potential, the energy, the urge to try and this thing of like, look at me, I can walk, look at me, I can spell, and I can count till 15. And then we put them in these spaces where basically they are told you don't know squat, for the next 15 years. If you're lucky, you'll get out in 15. If you're unlucky, like us, you will go on till grad school and, get a PhD in order to just make a living, right? I mean, there is a certain demeaning, dehumanizing aspect to, I think, the education, the way we have structured it. And so it is, this idea of the school of one is saying, really, how can we create a system that is sensitive to the needs of individuals? And I think this is combined with Zhao's point, which is that now we have the tools and resources to be able to do that this was not something necessarily that was possible before. I think I will sort of somewhat differ from Zhao in the sense of, why do we need teachers? I think we will need adults in that space. Now, whether we call them teachers, whether we call them mentors, whether we call them guides, whether that is one individual, or so on, or it's an array of individuals, I think that's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about, is how do we meet the needs? I mean, each of our children went to school, or in certain cases are going to school still. Did those institutions meet that unique collection of talents, skills, good, bad, that individual was? And so can we, and I think that we're at the point where we can, but what I hear too often is this sort of the fake personalization, of learning, which is that here is what we need you to learn, like this math equation, and we're going to give you, questions. It's like the adaptive GRE. That's not what I'm trying to talk about. It is personalization at the level of individual, allowing them to achieve their trajectory, to create their path through this process, and what kind of scaffold and support, whether it's technological, whether it is micro-credentialing, whether it is the kinds of adults in the space with them, whether it's a room or an online space. That to me is like a really interesting question to ask. And what's the system that can allow that to happen?
I was just wondering, Shuangyi and Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think that there are a lot of debates that are starting, and we've talked about this. One family says, my kids did a lot better online, and I want to stay online. Another family says, my kids struggled, it was impossible for me to do. I can't wait until school reopens. And both of them are right. But that isn't the way we think about schooling. We think about schooling like there's one best way, and we tax everybody because schooling's important. And what your taxes pay for is the one best way, which actually turns out not to be a very good way at all. So imagine the analogy to restaurants. If we treated restaurants the way that we treat schools, we tax everybody so that they never had to pay for food. And then there'd be this giant communal food hall where everybody would come and get the same meal,
Well, the communist China, communist Soviet Union tried that, Chris, did not work very well.
No, it wouldn't work very well. And people wouldn't stand for it. They'd say, what on earth are you doing? Just because I like a fried chicken restaurant doesn't mean every restaurant should serve nothing but fried chicken. So again, I think in the future, what's going to happen is disruption of K-12 that comes from above, disruption of higher ed. When my late colleague, Clay Christensen, came out with the book Disrupting Class, in which he predicted K-12 education would be predicted by online, I had a kind of a quiet, off-the-record dialogue with him in which I said, Clay, there's two ways in which this is off target. One of them is the disruption isn't online. The disruption is the personalization that online enables. And second, K-12 is not going to be the first thing that's disrupted. It's higher and adult education that's going to be the first thing that's disrupted, because that's a consumer market. It's not a captive market by the system of taxation. And, he never really recanted about disrupting class, but his later writings certainly moved in this direction. Not, I think, because of that dialogue with me, but because he realized that was in fact the right way to think about it. I think the same kind of thing is going to happen out of the pandemic. I think we'll see 1,000 flowers bloom in adult capacity building and online informal learning, and then that's going to migrate down into the universities, and there'll be 1,000 flowers in terms of the learning environments. All universities, no matter how extreme we consider them to be, are really in a very narrow range compared to what's possible. And I think that we'll see that range expand, and I think we're pushing that in some of our silver lining for learning episodes. And then in K-12, families are going to start to say, well, wait a minute, if I want my kids to go to this particular kind of university, then why does my K-12 school have to be oriented to a completely different kind of educational system? So I do think that the debates are gradually going to move away from the one size fits all into an acceptance, just as with restaurants, that you regulate outcomes. So you make sure that people don't get sick. You make sure that not every restaurant serves nothing but meat, so that there's a balanced diet. But you don't try to mandate, the model that if you don't like it, you have to pay more to get something different.
Well, thanks, Chris. I know we have some question from the audience, and
yeah, so there's a question from Dante, but I think we're going to hold that one for the end because I think that's a nice summary question for us for the 50th episode. But Robert Nelson asked that schools have acquired social roles as well as traditional learning roles. How will that be embedded in the transformations you are describing? So if I have to just quickly address that, I think that schools always have had that role, and it's kind of sad that we haven't recognized it. I think one thing that the pandemic has done has made that role more salient. And I'd love to hear what others think about Robert's question or comment.
Anybody wants to jump in? Kurt?
Well, I'll jump in. In this country, the idea that the schooling system in my generation and subsequent generations has produced almost 50% of the electorate who are capable of ignoring reality at a level that I never thought was possible. It's like the Dark Ages. I was thinking about this historically. In the Dark Ages, people believed in certain dogmas and they ignored all evidence to the contrary. The earth was flat. The sun went around the earth. Objects that were twice as heavy fell twice as fast. Why even do the experiment? We know that this is true, and they ignored all the evidence to the contrary. Somehow, our modern educational system has taken us back to the Dark Ages, and that is a profound failure of the social part of the educational system, as well as the intellectual part of the educational system.
Well, I want to jump in to say that in order to get away from that, so I don't think we can embed some of the fundamentals of the traditional education was not working. If you look at all our education reforms, just look basically the NAEP data, the national report data, it has not made big changes, but I don't even trust that data. I think a big problem with the artists, it's that one size fits all, we want to do this. But what I'm interested in is what I call school within a school model. When you want to create a new paradigm, create options, let those people who love the old have the old, but I would build a school within a school that's when it embodies a new model, a new paradigm of education to do that. So I was wondering, Kurt and Shangye, do you have anything to add to that question?
I'll let Shangye go.
No? Okay. Go ahead.
Well,
Kurt.
I mean, if I can just add one thing, I mean, this idea of the school within the school, I mean, this is a model that I lead a group of designers who work with schools and school districts. So that's exactly what we developed in the local school district here. And it's been a fascinating experiment. And the thing is that now the school board has voted to expand it beyond just a small group. So which is sort of a positive side in that.
So I guess I'll go, unless Chris wants to jump in as a final comment before we go to the last question. Anyone want to go back to this?
Go for it, Kurt.
Chris?
I think we should go. Yeah, we're at 10 minutes.
Let's go to
away,
the
so-
last question.
So Dante has sent us a nice question, a dandy question. But, you know, she also sent me a book last week. Lo and behold, it's by Young Zhao and Dante. An education crisis is a terrible thing to waste. How radical changes can spark student excitement and success. Thank you, Dante. However, you forgot to sign it. I'm going to send it back in the mail and get you to sign this one. No, I'll meet you at a conference sometime. Anyways, Dante sent us a question. She asks, what is your personal aha moment from the previous episodes? Did anything you learned hosting this show change your thoughts or add to your thoughts? Who wants to go first?
Why don't you go
I'll-
first? Actually, Kurt, I would like, no?
No,
I'm willing to
I'll
take
go
a shot.
last.
So we've seen an incredible array of different kinds of locations where education takes place, curricula that are different, assessments that are different, instructional models that are different, technologies that are different. But if you said to me, you can choose one thing, you can choose a location, curriculum, assessment, technology, teaching strategy, or teacher, I'd pick the teacher, right? And yet somehow, you know, the level of investment that we make in teachers to be creative and resilient and innovative is low. And I think that, to me, the aha moment is that with all the creativity we can do with all the other dimensions, if we don't have the teacher that can take advantage of those dimensions, then we're cooked.
You know, I would, you know, jump in to say this. What surprised me, what my aha moment, I think it was, I mean, there's many aha moments for me, was really things I did not know. That's Kurt organized, and the ones from Antarctica. I didn't know they were broadcasting from there. I didn't know they were running those things. Actually, I was quite, you know, pleasantly surprised. That was very good. But what really truly got me thinking is the students. I know they were selected, you know, they were not representatives of all students, but I was surprised how well they are managing their learning, how well they work on their learning, and the power of that. I shared a link with our group, with our host, but I'll share this on the YouTube as well. It's called Angie Play. I was actually alerted to it by someone from New York who wrote a book with Pazzi Solberg about play. So he asked me, do you know this Angie Play in China? I said, I didn't. So I kind of tracked down this thing. It's an amazing thing. Kids are actually playing. But what from the reflection I read is that there's fake play and there's real play. You know, there's required play, there's real play, but the emphasis, this is for early childhood education. It talks about, they're not trying to teach children how to play. This is after really almost 20 years of experiment now, moving from, you know, fake play, where adults trying to tell children what to do, how to do it, towards later on say, okay, adults are supposed to be understanding what play means and what they're learning, what's going on in this process. So to me, if, for example, the Nepal, you know, episode where students learn English and other things from MOOCs. I'm not a big fan of all MOOCs, but I'm a big fan of open resources. That is happening. So those adults, they were instrumental. Without them, they wouldn't necessarily get kids to do it. But then children went beyond the adults' expectations. So that's how we recreate the possibilities. And that was really a big thing for me. Another thing that from the Global Online Academy, that got me thinking about, all these traditionally prestigious schools can agree to say, I will accept. I mean, they're supposed to be competitors, but they're working together on something that they can share. So I think the mechanism, Chris, you're talking about for sharing, for reorganizing, reforming learning are there. It's happening. So that's what I think I've learned from this.
Punya or Sheng-E, want to jump in next?
My aha moment, actually, the recent aha moment that is the most is that is when Roy sharing this kind of what's his most popular program in the pandemic is about this autobiography. This is kind of really add a lot to my thoughts and very inspiring that I didn't think, I never think that this kind of a program is so welcomed during the pandemic, and that this may points to some deep need as kind of person in the heavy technology times. Yeah, I just sharing this.
Thank you. So since Kurt, you made the pun on Dante's name, I'm going to do the thing about yin and yang. So just to make sure that we cover both first and last name. So there is the yin yang, sort of the good and the bad, I think, of this, right? And I think, Chris, at some point you had quoted like, this is the best of times, this is the worst of times. And I think that these episodes and the sort of the experience of having lived through this past year makes you feel both, right? And I think like with Young, those episodes with the kids, even though they were not necessarily representative of the whole of the it's not a random sample or whatever you want to call it, really was inspiring. I don't think there was like a single aha moment necessarily for me, but I know this, that I have changed in my thinking over these past 50 episodes. I always had this sort of the sense that, that we have to design systems, because all the work that I did when I was at Michigan State, working with teachers and so on, just made it clear to me that unless and until we change the system, you can create the most innovative educators, but the system will just beat them down. And so that's part of the reason why I'm at Arizona State and I'm trying to do the work that I do, is how can we think about designing the systems? At the same time, I think I've come around a little bit towards where Young stands, which is sort of this idea of the school of one. And how do you balance these two? How do you create an educational system which recognizes, acknowledges the individual? For some reason, whenever we create something at scale, it becomes aggregates, it becomes averages. We start looking at means, we lost, and what is lost in that is the individual. And I think that that's been, I don't know where this is going to lead me in the future in some ways, but I know that has become something which has really stood out to me. And that's why I think those examples from Bannon or from the global network, Young, that you mentioned just a moment ago, those stood out for me because they were talking about systems which were receptive to individuals. And I think that to me is an honorable challenge for all of us to be looking at. And I would love to get some people who can speak to that, who are speaking to the design of systems, but not in terms of averages and aggregates and test scores and stuff that way, but speaking to individual passions and interests and the unique sort of human trajectories, because that's what we have in our educational systems, are unique human stories. And that comes back to, I think, the Sheng-E's point about that autobiographical or the storytelling or the narrative. Each of us is an evolving story. And I don't think that schools are playing an important role in developing that story in positive ways. And I think the system has to be blamed for that, for a lot of it.
By the way,
So-
Patrick Dixon just Patrick, good to see you. Is on the list. Said, I wish schools could design one day a week for students to work on learning what they want to learn. I would say at least 3 days or 4 days. Kurt, go for it. I know we're running out of time, but I love that comment.
Hi, Patrick. I was a student at Wisconsin in the late 80s and talked to you several times back then. Wish I could have taken your classes, but you went off to Michigan State and other things. Oh, we met at a conference. That's right. We met at the site conference in March 2007 in San Antonio and had dinner. I want to say that what struck me is the first week. The fact that these people, these really brilliant people, were willing to show up to talk to Young for an hour and think about the future together, and then to hang with him and all of us for 50 odd weeks so far. Everyone's given up their time. I mean, that struck me, the commitment that my colleagues have made to the show, that know a heck of a lot more than I do about school reform and restructuring. And so I'm learning from them each and every week. So the willingness and the participation. There's other things though. And I definitely want to thank all of them for educating me. There are real people that we're involving each week. We can read about this, we can get the books that Young can go through all the different actors and players that are making changes in schools, but we're actually bringing that people in that he's talking about in the books he's writing or in the books Chris is writing and so forth. And they're easy to contact and they all pretty much all say yes. I often say that, 70% of people will say yes. I don't know of anybody who said no so far, that we've contacted. Maybe you all have, but so far, people have said yes, they've come in, and they're all trying to push ahead. They're all each show has had some positive components. Yes, there's been problems. Yes, people are dealing with different things in different countries. In Italy, we had a show, in Israel and so forth. The ISTE show, we haven't mentioned the ISTE show. But to me, that was one of the more powerful shows that we had. People are dealing with the entire school system in Los Angeles during a pandemic and willing to give up an hour to talk to us about what's going on. Oh my God. And there are so many interesting things that are happening there as well as in New Orleans and other places in that show. If people can go back and look at the ISTE show, there was a lot of eye-opening things there in that particular show. The other thing that struck me is we've been meeting each week and the technology has worked for the most part. Each and every week, we had people from Nepal, kids with low bandwidth in Nepal. They went in and out a little bit. We had some difficulty hearing one or two of them, but we had like 6 kids and pretty much all of them we could hear fairly clearly. I mean, that show, it was too many people, granted, but it was amazing the fact that technology worked and what they were doing. So I'm following up with the folks in Nepal and I'm going to do a human subjects IRB this coming week with my student. We're going to interview those kids about their self-directed learning. We're going to try and come up with some findings that maybe I'll share in this particular show. So while my colleagues have been studying schools and education and transformation and educational reform for decades, what I've been doing for the past decade or two is studying what I call extreme learning. And so that's why we had the penguin people come in. That's why we had the person from studying the Antarctic toothfish and also to the environmental shows. And so how people learn from a plane, from a train, from a boat, from an airport, from wherever you are in the world, how we can enable learning to happen for everybody on this planet. So I want to also say that it's the contributions that we're making that makes a difference to me. We've got a website. We're revamping the website. We've got a couple of students who are coming up with tags in the system for all 50 shows and beyond, so people can utilize the videos that we've been doing each and every week in their classes for their dissertations, for their research. It'll be a mineable resource. We also have Shangai's journal that we'll be contributing to. And Shanghai, you got to remind us to write a little piece for you, okay, about our best show. Remember that, send us an email. We could contribute at a conference as a group, and we're going to explore that. We are doing our blog posts. So Young's idea has evolved and has enabled us to make a contribution in the educational space that is unique, that is us as Silver Lining for Learning show. And so, that's what I get as my takeaway. Dante, what really got my attention? This all worked, and it will continue to work. We may have some downtime here or there, but I'm delighted that it has worked. And so I need to go into the next show. If that's okay, because we're getting at the end of time here, we're a couple minutes over. The next show is called Innovative Sustainable Forest Management Education in the Asia Pacific region. We have folks from the University of British Columbia coming in to talk about a project that involves open educational resources and open courseware for forestry management and sustainability. It's the fourth educational, ecological show, environmental show that I've been creating. It might be the last one, but come next week at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. Well, we got to remember that's daylight savings is changing everything tonight, but 5:30 Eastern Standard or Eastern
Daylight Time.
Eastern Daylight Time. So I want to thank all of you for coming and thanks for attending our 50 shows, our 50th anniversary. Young needs to make the last statement. It's his little baby. He dreamed this up. Go ahead.
No, this is all ours. You guys have been tuning this bigger than what we had imagined. So thank you, the audience, and thank you, everybody here.